I'd kiss you if it wouldn't kill me. Patreon-sponsored review time. I've got a few of these, actually. I'm a little bit behind trying to catch up on them. I'm working on it, everybody, I swear. So this time I was commissioned to take a look at the first 2 episodes of Pushing Daisies. This was a TV show that lasted, I believe it was 2 seasons. It unfortunately kind of got badly hit by the writer's strike that happened during its first season, which meant its first season got truncated, and by the time the show got going again, it had kind of lost its momentum and the ratings weren't there in the second season, which is a shame because it's pretty dang good. Here's the thing. I actually had watched Pushing Daisies back in the day. I think I watched the first 5 episodes. I probably would have stuck with it beyond that, but at the time I didn't have DVR, so if I wasn't home at the time something aired, I didn't see it. So it wasn't a show that I was prepared to ensure in my schedule that I was home to watch, even though I did enjoy it. If I had DVR, I probably would have stuck with it for as long as it was running. This was really cool to go back and revisit, though, and kind of remember why I liked it so much. And honestly, I really ought to check out more of Brian Fuller's stuff. He's the creator of this. He also created Wonder Falls, which I've never seen. He did Hannibal, which I have seen, and is amazing and so weird. And he did the first seasons of American Gods, which I still need to get around to, and Star Trek Discovery, which I also need to get around to. But I really enjoy the vibe that he brings to things. He brings a very, at least from the stuff that I've seen of him, a very fairy tale kind of vibe to it. And I mean, I'm saying that basing it mostly off this and Hannibal, but there's a very different kind of fairy tale vibe. Hannibal feels very much like a Grimm's fairy tale vibe to it. The darkest, most twisted possible thing that you could have that qualifies for a fairy tale. Whereas this has a bit more of a sweet bedtime story kind of vibe to it. And there's a number of things that lend it that. Part of it's the narration, which is pleasant and wonderful and actually does a lot to help sell what's going on. There's something about having this nice, calm, pleasant voice explain some very weird concepts and some of the stranger backstory points that just makes them go down better. I suppose I should talk about the premise of this thing, which... All right, first of all, and this is part of what I mean by, like, it feels very fairy tale-esque, because fairy tale-esque, it doesn't feel the need to explain itself. So I'm going to tell you the premise and how this works, and when I do, understand that the show does not explain why this is the case. This just is how it is, and which personally I love. So if you're somebody who needs to know, wait a minute, why is that happening? This show's probably not for you. You need to have a pretty high suspension of disbelief to roll with a show like this. But I am capable of that, and I actually really like it when things go for that. So, premise is, we have our lead character named Ned. Now, Ned, when he was a child, discovered a rather odd ability that he has, which is that if he touches something, like physical contact, with something that is dead, that thing will then come back to life. Now, there's a couple of caveats to this. The first is, if after it has been brought back from his touch, if he ever touches it a second time, it dies again permanently and cannot be brought back again. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, if he doesn't sort of re-deadify the thing that he brought back within a minute, then something else in his proximity has to die. Basically, like, I guess to balance the ledger. So if he doesn't re-dead it within a minute, something else will die. And I say something else because it's not necessarily going to be a person. It can be, but we also see instances of birds dropping out of the sky and things like that. So it can vary, but if the dead thing is kept alive, something else must die. And Again, this gets no explanation whatsoever. Now, he has kind of a business deal. He is partnered with a sort of a private detective named Emerson, who basically, he found out what Ned is capable of doing, and so he works with Ned to basically collect rewards on open cases, whenever there's, any information provided that leads to a conviction in this open case, there's a reward. They collect those sorts of things by sort of conning their way into the morgue, and I actually really love the coroner. I don't know if he's the coroner or the medical examiner, but is this old guy who's just sort of, because they come up with these ridiculous lies as an excuse to get in there and look at the bodies, and he's just like, wait a minute, didn't you say this last time? And Ned's just like, no. But he still lets them in. But anyway, so Ned will touch them and basically ask them, hey, how'd you die? And will then, they'll use that information to attempt to solve the situation and get a reward. So that's your initial setup. So there's a little bit of a procedural sort of thing going on there, which is kind of a neat format. And then the one other wrinkle is our third major character, who is Chuck. Now, Chuck is... And Chuck is a girl, and Chuck is Ned's childhood sweetheart. When they were both kids, fairly young, they were each other's first kiss, that kind of innocent young childhood first kiss sort of thing. But Ned accidentally killed Chuck's dad. Because at the time when he was a kid, he did not yet know about the bring something back and it stays alive for too long, something else has to die rule. He didn't know that was a thing. And so his mother had died, I think, of an embolism, and he brought her back and kept her around, and then across the street, Chuck's dad drops dead. And then soon after, Ned loses his mother anyway, because she goes to kiss him goodnight that night and immediately dies from coming into contact with him. So the thing is, on the surface, this is actually, really morbid and, depressing, potentially even. Except the show, like I said, it has such a gentle touch, and the characters are so endearing, and there's sort of this slightly weird pleasantness to it that makes it all work. And again, I think lends to the fairy tale kind of feel to it, because a lot of fairy tales are morbid, but at the same time they end with, and everyone lived happily ever after. So you're like, oh, that was nice, but you don't stop and think about what it was you actually heard. So that's your core group of three. Now, the first episode, I rewatched the first two episodes. The first episode it's dealing with all the general premise, and it is solving the murder of Chuck, because she did die, and Ned brings her back and keeps her around. But now they both have feelings for each other, and Ned can't ever touch her again. Because if he does, she'll drop dead. And so that's your core group of three, and there's just some really interesting dynamics there. I really do love Emerson. I love the actor who plays him. I've loved him since I saw him in The Frighteners, back in the 90s. He's just got this, he's great at this sort of exasperated, kind of feel to him. And I also like, they give him a quirk of being really into knitting. He's knit little woolen gun holsters, which I love those kinds of little details that are in this. And visually, it's really interesting as well. I remember looking it up when it first aired, thinking, was Tim Burton in some way involved in this? Because it is very Tim Burton-esque, but I want to be more specific than that, because usually when people think Tim Burton visually, they think, Beetlejuice, they think, Sleepy Hollow, the sort of darker, I mean the more bright end of Tim Burton. I mean the stuff set in the suburban parts for Edward Scissorhands. I mean Big Fish. I mean even Charlie and the Chocolate Factory was his version. So it has that kind of feel to the visuals, which I also think, again, adds very much to the atmosphere of the whole thing, as not in any way trying to feel like it's set in the real world, which is good because none of this is even vaguely realistic in any way, shape, or form. We also have a few other cool supporting characters that I quite enjoy there, because Ned is actually a pie maker. That is theoretically his day job. He owns a pie shop called the Pie Hole. But the reason he hooked up with Emerson is he wasn't really making his rent with that, so he does in fact need the extra money. But his main employee there, played by Kristen Chenoweth, has a massive crush on him, which is not reciprocated. I think this might have actually been the first thing I saw Kristen Chenoweth in, now that I think of it. Ned also has a dog, which was his childhood dog that he brought back from the dead, and he now can't touch again. So like he has this sort of puppeted little hand on a stick that he holds out, and it's like to pet the dog because he can't touch the dog. And so there's things like that, and the guest casts are fun, and the murders that they solve are kind of nuts and ridiculous, including Chuck's. Chuck's is kind of ridiculous, and we get these interesting backstories to the guest characters. In the case of the very first episode, to Chuck's aunts, who are involved in sort of solving everything. And then in the second episode to not only the person who died, but this other person who had a relationship with him. And again, very, very weird stuff going on, but just presented so matter-of-factly and so pleasantly. This is a fairly unique... Again, I don't know how representative it is of Brian Fuller's things. Like I said, I never saw Wonder Falls, but so it might be very emblematic of what Brian Fuller does overall. But for me, I do feel this is a pretty unique piece of work in terms of its presentation and the way that it goes about telling its incredibly unusual story. But it has its own wonderful internal logic, which is completely different and distinct and separate from the Earth logic of us humans. But it does seem very internally consistent, which is something that I always admire, because I love something that feels like a unique world, not necessarily in the, we have this massive show Bible and we've written these massive expansive backstories for every character. Like, not necessarily in that way, because that can get kind of dull and encyclopedic, but just in the sense of, look, the world doesn't work the way that the world you live in does. But, it has its own rules, and it does this. And presented just very matter-of-factly. I like that when I can find it, and I don't find it often enough. And I like that here. It's the same kind of thing that I like about things like Labyrinth, or The Fall, or The Fountain. Things that don't feel the need to explain themselves and just kind of are, and have enough respect for the audience that you'll either go with it or you won't. And if you go with it, this really is a great show. I can't vouch for the entirety of the series. I don't know if it ever lost steam, but I do know that it stayed good for at least the next 3 or 4 episodes after this, because as I said, I did watch it back when it originally aired, and I remember liking it. But I hadn't heard from anyone who stuck with it that it got bad, only that the ratings went down and it got canceled. But if you're into quirky, odd, just unusual but pleasant television, I do recommend Pushing Daisies. It's weird in the best way. So that was great to get a commission for, because yes, on the Patreon at certain support levels, you do actually get to just flat out tell me something to review, and I enjoy it because it gets me to either see for the first time or revisit, if I hadn't seen it in a long time, stuff that I wouldn't otherwise be talking about on this channel, and I really do enjoy doing that. So thanks so much for watching Pushing Daisies, first 2 episodes, or your thoughts on the show as a whole, if you've seen it. Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. A whole bunch of stuff to do. Buttons, links, Patreon, P.O. Box, and all sorts of stuff. There's links for all that stuff down in the description. Check it out, or also don't if you really don't want to. That's okay. I'm not going to make you do anything, because at the end of the day, folks, it's you who are the council, and me, I'm just running meetings. So until next time, this council is adjourned.